A studio technician named Noah was alone in the control room at Chess Records in Chicago at 2 in the morning in the fall of 1967, and he listened to the first take of a session that had produced 14 takes in one night, and he did not erase it. He had been instructed to erase it. He kept it on the reel for 7 years without telling anyone. He never told Etta James. He almost did once. Chess Records in 1967 was a label in transition. The decade that had made it the center of the American blues and R&B recording world was ending. The artists who had defined it were moving toward the end of their original runs, not gone yet, not irrelevant yet, but in the specific position that the music business produces with consistent cruelty. The position of being at the peak of your craft at the same time the industry has shifted its attention to what is new. Leonard Chess was still running the label. The studios on South Michigan Avenue were still running full schedules. The musicians who had defined the sound of the label were still the musicians being called for sessions. But the weight in the room had changed. The certainty that what was being made would reach the people it needed to reach, that certainty had become a question rather than an assumption. Etta James was recording in the fall of 1967 in the context of that transition, was trying, in the specific way that a singer at her level tries things in the studio, to find the recording that would do what her recent sessions had not fully done, reach the place where the voice and the material were completely in alignment, where the song stopped being a thing she was performing and became a thing she was saying. She had done this in the Muscle Shoals sessions that summer. She had done it before. She knew what it felt like when it happened, and she knew the difference between a performance that was going in that direction and one that was performing the direction without arriving. The session was a night session, called for 9 in the evening, running as sessions sometimes run until the early hours of the following morning. By midnight, they had worked through the arrangement on multiple takes and had produced several that were technically complete and emotionally correct to a standard that would have satisfied most producers. They had not produced the one. Etta James knew the one was still in front of her and not behind her, and the producer knew it too. And so they continued. By 2 in the morning, they had 14 takes, and Etta James was sitting on the studio floor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, not exhausted exactly, but in the specific depleted state of someone who has given 14 versions of something that was not quite right and who is recalibrating before the 15th. The producer, a Chess staff producer who had been running sessions for years and who had developed in those years the specific ear for the difference between a singer who has more and a singer who is given everything they have, looked at the clock and said, "That is enough for tonight. We have what we need." He said, "Erase 1 through 13, keep 14. I will listen in the morning." He left. Noah was the night shift engineer, 24 years old, 2 years into the job at Chess, a technical person who had been present at hundreds of sessions and who had, in those 2 years, developed an ear for the recordings that were not what the producer said they were. He had heard sessions called complete that were not complete, and sessions called failures that were not failures. He had learned to separate the assessments the session room produced under the pressure of schedules and fatigue from the assessments that the recordings produced when you listened to them alone in the quiet of the early morning with no one in the room and no agenda. After the musicians and the producer left, Noah sat at the console and threaded back to take one. He pressed play. Take 1 was the first take of the evening. The take that had been recorded before Etta James had fully settled into the material, before the band had found the pocket of the arrangement, before the technical work of the session had begun. It was, by every standard the session room uses, the preliminary take, the one that establishes where you are before you begin the journey of finding where you need to be. He listened to it, It lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In those 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Etta James's voice did something that none of the subsequent 13 takes had done, not because it was technically superior, because it was not, but because it was unguarded in a way that the subsequent takes were not. She had not yet decided what the song was. She was inside the material without a plan, without the layer of intention that a singer builds around a performance as the session progresses, without the specific armor of repetition. She was singing it for the first time, and the first time was, in this take, audibly the first time. Audibly, the moment before she understood what the song was going to require of her. And in that moment before understanding, something was present in her voice that was not present in any of the polished takes that followed. Something that sounded like the inside of the thing, rather than the surface of the thing. Noah sat at the console for a long time after the take ended. Then he marked takes 2 through 13 for erasure as instructed. He took the reel with take 1 off the machine. He put it in a box. He labeled the box with a session number and a date and a handwritten note that said, "First take, do not erase." He put the box on a shelf in the back of the tape archive that no one checked because the archive contained thousands of reels and was not organized in a way that made it easy to find anything that was not being actively looked for. He did not tell the producer. He did not tell Etta James. He told himself he would mention it at some point when the right moment arrived. The right moment did not arrive on the schedule he had imagined. Sessions continued at Chess. The label continued its transition. Noah continued doing his job, running night sessions, maintaining the equipment, doing the work that night shift engineers do in the buildings where music is made, in the hours when the music business is asleep. The reel sat on the shelf in the archive. He thought about it periodically, in the way you think about a thing you have kept. Not always, not with any urgency, but with the specific awareness of its presence in a place only you know to look. The almost conversation happened 18 months after the session, in a hallway at Chess when Etta James came through for a different recording project. He saw her in the hallway. He was carrying tape boxes and she was walking toward the exit, and they passed each other, and he said her name and she stopped and looked at him and he said, "I worked your session last fall." She said, "The 14 take session." He said, "Yes." He said, "There was a..." He stopped. She looked at him. She said, "There was a what?" He said, "Nothing. I was going to say the board was running well that night." She looked at him for a moment with the specific expression of someone who suspects they have not been told the whole sentence. She said, "Thank you." She walked out. He had stopped because he had, in the second before he completed the sentence, understood something that he had not understood in the 18 months he had been keeping the reel. He did not know what she would want to do with the information. He did not know whether she would want to hear the take. He did not know whether the take would be what she needed, whether it would tell her something she wanted to know about what her voice had done on a night before she was ready, or whether it would be something else entirely, a document of a moment she had been trying to move past. He had kept it because he thought it was worth keeping. He had not thought carefully enough about whether the person it belonged to would agree. The reel stayed in the archive through the sale of Chess Records in 1969, and the subsequent changes of ownership and facility, and through the eventual degradation of the archive into the organized disorder of a catalog that has changed hands multiple times, and whose full contents nobody has comprehensively mapped. Whether the first take of Etta James's fall 1967 session survives on that reel is not something anyone has confirmed. What survives is the fact that Noah listened to it alone at 2 in the morning and thought it was worth keeping. That judgment was not wrong. The night shift engineer in the empty control room is sometimes the only person in the building who is listening purely, without the agenda of the session, without the pressure of the schedule, without anything between the ear and the tape except the specific quiet of a building that has stopped being a machine for the night and has become, briefly, a room where music can be heard as what it is. The question of what the first take of that session contained, what was audible in Etta James's voice in the 3 minutes and 40 seconds before she had decided what the song required, is not answerable from the outside. The people who were in the room either did not hear it or did not remember it separately from the 13 takes that followed. Noah heard it alone. He made his assessment alone. He acted on it alone. The entire chain of events, the decision not to erase, the 7 years on the shelf, the almost conversation, the silence in the hallway, produced nothing visible. There is no recording that has emerged. There is no take that has been found and released and that has allowed people to hear what Noah heard. The story ends without the evidence that would confirm whether the judgment was correct. But that is not what the story is about. The story is about a 24-year-old engineer sitting alone at a console at 2 in the morning, listening without an agenda, and deciding that what he heard was worth keeping. He was not asked to make that judgment. He made it anyway. He made it on behalf of a singer who did not know he was making it and who would never know. He made it because the tape was there and the room was quiet, and the take was, in his estimation, the kind of thing that should not be lost. The fact that it may have been lost anyway does not diminish the judgment. It makes the judgment more, not less, significant. He kept it knowing it might not survive, knowing he might never be in a position to give it back, knowing the keeping itself was the only action available to him. He kept it. That is the record. She never knew. He never told her. He kept something of hers for years in a box on a shelf and almost gave it back once and stopped. He spent a long time afterward thinking about whether he had made the right call in the hallway. He decided he had. He said to himself, "She would have wanted to know on her terms, not mine." The take was hers. He had kept it. Keeping it was the right thing. Telling her on a random afternoon in a hallway was not. That is a distinction that is simple in retrospect and almost impossible in the moment. He made it. Subscribe to Etta James, The Untold Stories. Every day we find the rooms behind the music, the conversations nobody recorded, the moments that made everything else possible. The comment section is open. Tell us which story you want us to find next. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.